What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to learn how to get started using SketchUp 2025. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so I don't want to waste a bunch of your time, so I want to dive right into it. One thing you need to know is this is going to be taught in the Pro version of SketchUp. If you go to SketchUp's website on the plans page, there are multiple different versions, but this is taught in the desktop version. I will link to a video down below talking about the differences between the free and the Pro, or the online and the Pro versions, but I wanted you to know this is taught in that version. I'll be providing some resources for the online version in the coming weeks as well. All right, so when you first open up SketchUp 2025, it's going to look something like this. You're going to have your recent files down below, and you have the option to pick a template right here. So usually you're going to pick something based on the units that you want to use. This isn't a huge deal because you can change all of this stuff later. But for right now, from this page, what we're going to do is we're going to click on an option for, you can go ahead and pick architectural and pick the units that you use. So in my case, mine's in architectural inches, but you can set yours to be whatever you want from that list. Okay, so when you first open up SketchUp, it's probably going to look something like this. And so it's going to have a few different areas that you need to be aware of. The first is going to be the 3D workspace. We're going to talk more about this in a minute, but that's where you're going to do your three-dimensional modeling, your orbiting around, all of your 3D work. Everything around this is going to support this space. Now at the top of the page, you've got your file bar, which is going to give you access to all of your different tools. Most of the time, we're going to try to use keyboard shortcuts to access tools, but if you want to access tools manually, this is one way to access them. This is also where you're going to be able to do things like saving your models and things like that. Down below, you've got a toolbars section right here. These toolbars are going to give you access to different tools. So if I click on one of these tools, it's going to activate a tool in the 3D workspace like this, and you can do something with it. Now, these are editable and adjustable. So notice how each one of these bars has a little like dragger spot. You can click and drag toolbars, and you can dock them to the side of your page if you want to do that, or you can move them around and let them kind of float in the 3D space like this. So most of the time I try to keep these as tight as possible so that I don't have a whole bunch of additional space in here, because what ends up happening is you can have like a whole bunch of toolbars in here and this just starts taking away from your workspace. So I like to keep these stacked as tight as I can. You can also right click in this space to access additional toolbars. I have more toolbars than you will because I have extensions loaded in SketchUp, which we'll talk about in a future video. One thing that I usually do is I like to right click up here and I like to turn on the large tool set and dock that to the left-hand side of my page. And I also like to right click and go to toolbars, and I like to toggle large icons off so that these icons aren't taking up so much space on my page at the top of the page here, like this. And then I'm just going to tighten this up a little bit and we're good to go. So if you ever lose a toolbar, you can just right click and find that toolbar in here and turn it back on. Now, on the right-hand side of the page, you have your tray. Your tray is going to contain a number of things for affecting the way things in your model look, selecting things to give you more information, other things like that. So if I click on this face and I click on Entity Info, notice how selected objects have information that show up about them in this toolbar. But you've also got access to things like your materials section where you can apply materials. You can affect the styles of your model, which are going to affect the way that your model looks. So if you remember how I talked about how we can change the way that our model looks and feels once we're in here, you can do that using styles. Now, if you don't see the tray, you can go to Window, Default Tray, Show Tray to get that to show up. If you are on a Mac, there is no tray. Those are just windows. I think you just go into Window and you just turn on the individual windows. So if you wanted tags, for example, you do Window Tags, it'll pop up a little window over here. And you can kind of drag them off to the side and dock them together, but they just act a little bit differently, more like windows. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, you've got this value control bar and the instruction section. So the instructions section is going to show you information about the tool that you currently have active, as well as information about the measurements inside of the 3D space and the tools that you're working with. More about those in a minute, but if you're trying to figure out how a tool works, there's a lot of good clues in this bar. Note that if you right click and you toggle one of these off, like the prompt, that's not going to show up. So you just want to make sure you right click in here and have all of these checked in order to access those. So now let's talk about navigating in the 3D space, and then we'll get directly into modeling. So the first thing that I want you to make sure that you have, if you can, there's ways to work around this, but it's going to make your life a lot easier. You want to make sure that you have a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. And so the reason for that is because that scroll wheel is going to really help you navigate around in the 3D space. And so on the left-hand side of the page, there is an option over here for a zoom tool. You can click and drag up and down in order to zoom. I almost never recommend that you do this because when you have that scroll wheel inside of the SketchUp space, you can actually scroll that wheel up and down like this in order to zoom in and out to different areas. And note that the area where your mouse is on the screen is going to affect where your camera zooms into and out from, like this. So by scrolling up and down, you can zoom in and out in the 3D space. Now, another thing you're going to be doing a lot of is orbiting. Orbiting is basically navigating your camera or moving your camera around the 3D space just by clicking and dragging like this. Now, you can access the orbit tool by clicking over here, but again, I rarely do that. Usually what I do instead is you can click and hold the middle mouse button down in order to orbit. That is going to be the best way to orbit inside of the 3D space. And so there's reasons for that. Like for example, let's say that I was pulling this up and down and I tried to come over here and click on the orbit tool. Notice how it turns off the tool that I currently have active. However, if I'm pulling this right here and I click and hold the middle mouse button, notice how that tool stays active. So I can actually orbit around while I'm working with tools if I use the click with middle mouse button option like this. So it's just a superior way to navigate. Now, one other thing you need to know about navigation is you can also pan. So there's an option over here to pan, and that's going to move your camera left and right like this. However, again, we're going to access that using our mouse and a keyboard shortcut. So, and by the way, when I have a tool active like this one, like this, and I no longer want that tool to be active, if you just tap the space key with a tool active, it's going to toggle on the select tool. So basically it disables any tool that you currently have active. So to get out of a tool, you can tap the space key. Now, what we want to do here to pan is if you click and hold your middle mouse button and then hold the shift key, notice how that goes into pan mode. So click and hold middle mouse button, hold shift key at the same time, that's going to put you in pan mode. And so what that does is that allows you to really quickly start navigating around in your model just like this without ever having to click on any of these icons. So I highly recommend that. One final thing about views is if you ever get so far zoomed in that you're just kind of like lost in the 3D space and you can't really like get out of it anymore, there's an option over here for zoom extents, which is going to take your view, completely zoom you out so that you see the extents of your model. So if you ever get lost, click on zoom extents. But now let's start talking a little bit about modeling in SketchUp. So the way that SketchUp works is it is an edge and face modeler. So what that means is that everything in the 3D space is made up of faces and edges. And so let's start at the very beginning. So let's draw a line. So in order to draw a line, we're going to use the line tool. Now, there's an option over here for the line tool, but at the very beginning, I want you to start learning to use keyboard shortcuts. Those are going to be the shortcuts that will toggle on tools in your three-dimensional space. So in this case, I'm tapping the L key on my keyboard to activate the line tool. So instead of clicking on the line tool right here, you can tap L. Now, I've created a resource that's going to make this a lot more helpful. It's my free downloadable keyboard shortcuts guide. You can download that keyboard shortcuts guide by visiting TheSketchUpEssentials.com/beginner. So if you go to TheSketchUpEssentials.com/beginner, you can click on the button, enter your email address, and it'll send you this keyboard shortcuts guide. And so that keyboard shortcuts guide is going to be printable. You can print it off and put it on the wall or next to your keyboard so that you can look at it and see what some of the different tools do. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by drawing a line. So to do that, I'm going to tap the L key on my keyboard. That's going to activate the line tool. Notice how when you do this, you get instructions on the bottom of the page for how the tool is going to work. So in this case, it says to click our first and set our first endpoint. So what that means is if I click in my space like this, it's going to set a point in the three-dimensional space. One thing to note about this, and this is for a lot of folks that have used like InDesign or something like that, we are not clicking and dragging in the 3D space. That's just not a very good way to do things. It's way better when you activate a tool to single click, let up, and then move your mouse, and then click again when you're ready to set the second point. So I'm going to single click, move my mouse, and then single click again in order to set an endpoint right here. So we've drawn our first line. And so one thing about these tools is you can also be precise with them. So let's say instead of doing this, right, instead of drawing just a random line between 2 points, I want to draw a line that's 4 feet long. Well, notice how when I single click, there's a value in this length box right here. Well, if I move my mouse in a direction, notice how I can type in a value. So I can type in 4 feet and hit the enter key, and that's going to draw a 4-foot line in the space. Note that you're not clicking into this space. It's just active when the tool is active. So again, if I was to draw a line here and I wanted it to be 20 feet, I would just single click, move my mouse in the direction that I want this line to go, and type in 20 feet and hit the enter key like this. Now, notice how when you do this, you're getting different colors in here. This is SketchUp using the inference engine in order to try to guess what direction you want to go. So if you move your mouse in this direction right here, notice how it's going to kind of lock to that green axis. That means that you're drawing a line in the green direction right here. If you move your mouse over here, notice how it's trying to do that on the red axis. This is extremely valuable because most of the time you want things to be drawn at a 90-degree angle. Not all the time, and you can definitely move your mouse in different directions in order to avoid that, but a lot of the time you really do want to draw along those inference directions right here. Notice a blue direction is going to indicate that we're drawing in the up direction. So if I orbit down using my middle mouse button like this, notice how this is going to move straight up and down like this. So most of the time, we want to try to use those inferences in order to draw along the axis directions. Now, you can lock those directions. So if you single click in the space and you tap the left, right, or up arrow keys, that is going to lock your line to a certain direction. So now let's talk just for a second about inferencing, because that's actually something that's going to be pretty valuable. So let's say that I have a box in this space and I want to draw a line that is aligned with this corner point, but it's over here. Well, notice how when I mouse over different things in this space, I'm getting little dots that show up. This is SketchUp recognizing different points of objects and trying to help you by saying, hey, do you want to draw based on this corner point right here? Or do you want to draw based on this middle point right here? So let's say I wanted to draw something that was aligned with the bottom of this box, but I also wanted it to align with this point right here. Notice how if I mouse over this and then move my mouse off of it, I'm getting an inference line right here. And so it's actually going to recognize, okay, if we draw it in the green direction right here, we're drawing a line that's going to be aligned with this point. So I can click, and now I know there's going to be a straight line between this point and this point right here. Now, one other thing about this is in addition to tapping the left, right, and up arrow keys, if you have a direction set, so if I move my mouse in the blue direction and I hold the shift key, notice how that's going to lock my directional inference to the up direction. And I can mouse over different things. And I can find things like midpoints of edges or endpoints of edges right here. So if I wanted to draw a line that was the same height as this one right here, I could just hold the Shift key, move my mouse over this point, and notice how when I click, it's going to set this point even though I had my mouse over here because I was holding the Shift key to lock that inference. So now let's talk a little bit about drawing shapes. So far we've drawn lines, but let's say we were to draw something like this, we were to draw something like this, and then we were to draw back to this point right here. Well, notice what SketchUp does is it draws a face in between those edges. And the reason why is because these three edges are coplanar, meaning they're on the same plane, they're flat. And so anytime you have three or more coplanar edges, SketchUp is going to try to close in that shape. So say that we wanted to draw a triangle. So I'm going to tap the L key, single click, and tap the up arrow key to draw this up. And say that we were to draw a line across in the red direction, and then to this point, notice how again, this is going to add a face inside of those edges right here. So, and you can do this with as many edges as you want. So as long as everything is coplanar, all right, so as long as this is flat and on the same plane, it's still going to fill in a face like this. Three or more coplanar edges and this will fill in a face. Okay, and so let's say you had a triangle like this one, but then you erased out this edge. Notice how now, even though you have four edges that come together, you don't have three or more coplanar edges in the space. So what that means is that this is currently not drawing a face, but notice how as soon as you draw a line in here, now these three edges are coplanar and these three edges are coplanar, and they all come together in order to form two additional faces. Now, one thing to note about shapes like this is say that you lose a face. So, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a rectangle, and I'm going to draw a line across like this. But say that for whatever reason you lost an edge on the outside, notice how this face goes away because this isn't closed in. Well, to heal a face, you can single click and just redraw that edge. So another thing that might happen is if you single clicked on this face and deleted it out, because this is a separate entity from the enclosing edges like this, say you wanted that face to come back, you can just redraw over this edge again and it'll heal this face back in. So if you ever lose a face like this one, you can just draw across here, and I accidentally drew that too far, but that's okay. It's going to heal that face in if you redraw over the edge. Okay, and so let's say we wanted to draw a more complex shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to single click. Remember, you tap the L key to activate the line tool, and you can single click, move your mouse in a direction, and let's say you wanted this to be a 20-foot line. You type in 20 feet and hit the enter key. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line up that's going to be 12 feet. And notice how this line tool stays active when you're drawing until you hit the space key in order to go back to your select tool. That can be really helpful for continuing to draw things in the space. But now, let's say that I wanted to draw a line up from the midpoint. So I can tap L, I can mouse over this middle point, and I can single click. Then I'm going to draw a line up that's going to be 5 feet tall. And I'm going to draw a line across that's going to go to the corners, like this. And so now what you can do is if you erase out these edges on this shape, what it's going to do is it's going to heal this into one big face like this. And so now that we're here, let's do something fun. We're going to talk more about this in the next video, but for now, I want you to tap the P key on your keyboard. So when you tap the P key, that's going to activate a tool called push-pull, and you can single click on a face like this, and you can extrude out by whatever distance you want. And again, notice how if I type in 50 feet and hit the enter key, that's going to extrude this out by 50 feet, like this. And so let's say that we wanted to add a wing to this house. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line up from the midpoint, and we're going to draw a line across that's going to be 10 feet. Then we can draw the line down. And we're going to do the same thing over here. So single click, draw a line down 10 feet right here. we're going to draw the line down like this. Well, in this case, what I want to do is the exact same thing. I'm going to tap the L key, single click, and move my mouse in the blue direction, and I'm going to hold the Shift key in order to draw to this height. So in this situation, I'm going to draw a line down like this, and I'm going to erase out this edge. Now, in this case, we're going to draw a line across to the top of this house. Now again, notice how there's no face showing up in here. But if you draw a line from this point to this point, and from this point to this point, it's going to heal that face in here just like this. So now we have a roof shape. And I'm going to go ahead and erase out this edge. And so then what we can do is we can erase out the edge. So you can tap the E key in order to activate the eraser, and you can click and drag across edges to erase them. Well, notice how that's merged this into a single face. Well, now I can tap the P key, single click, and move my mouse out. And we'll say that we're going to move this out by 15 feet and hit the Enter key. So now you have your first three-dimensional shape in SketchUp. So if you do want some additional help from me on learning to use SketchUp, I'm going to leave a link to my course on this page as well. That's where you can get a little bit more personalized help, as well as some specialized training and really a complete step-by-step process for learning to use SketchUp. So if you are looking for that, I will link to that on this page. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.